All right, let's get started. Welcome everybody to the September Florida Tableau user group. Um, to give you some context of our group, those that haven't been here before, we used to be the Orlando Tableau user group, and then a couple years ago, as the pandemic was going on, almost all of the Florida tugs kind of stopped doing things, but we still wanted to. So we asked them if we could be the Florida user group so we could connect with everybody here in the state. They said sure, so we have been doing that ever since. We've been doing monthly tugs almost 3 years straight now, so expect the same going forward. A little bit about Yamil. We're the leadership here for the Florida Tug. Yamil is, and again, an ambassador this year, so congrats on that, Yamil. Feel free to
Thank you.
connect with us
Thank you.
any which way. We're easy to reach. Just a little bit about us and our promise. A lot of networking, monthly speakers. Like I said, we'll promote job opportunities if they're given to us prior to these meetings. Easiest way to do that is if you join the Orlando user group on LinkedIn. You can post your job postings there. Otherwise, you're welcome to reach out to us directly, and we'll use that job posting here in the presentation to promote that for you. An opportunity here that came up last month. Um, Rui, who's also a Tableau ambassador, he they started a career path makers Tableau user group. So definitely worth going to check that out if you guys are looking for the next thing. If you're in between jobs at the moment, you can see all the leaders that are in that Tableau user group that's coordinating that. Some great people there. So feel free to reach out to that group. You can the link there is underneath, but you can search for it. It's the Data Fam Career Path Makers user group. We'll be giving away some swag at the end. You've got to stay to the end to be eligible. Can't just come in for the first 5 minutes and get out of here. So stay tuned, and we'll draw for that. If we don't do it on screen due to time, I'll contact everybody that wins after the fact. Upcoming speakers next month. We got Kevin Wee spoke before. He's a big Figma guy, so I'm sure that he'll be talking about that. Lee Feinberg, who's also an ambassador, will be in November, and we got confirmation today that Andy Kriebel will be joining us December 6th. So stay tuned. We'll be announcing the rest of those later this week. Today's speaker, Tableau Tim. Tim, thanks for being here. He's a lead analytics consultant at Aimpoint Digital. He's a Tableau visionary, obviously, LinkedIn learning instructor, which I did not know that. So I'll have to go see if I can find some of those. His first version he used was back in 2014, version 7. He also worked with Andy Kriebel at the Information Lab in the UK. Runs a YouTube channel. If you've never heard of Tim, which is would be surprising if you haven't, so definitely go there, subscribe to that as well. So Tim, I grabbed this from various profiles on the internet. It says that you're fiance. Did you get married yet?
I have been married. That's sort of whichever profile you got that from. I need to dutifully go and update it.
I'll
I have a
send you
husband
where
now.
I found that at, and then that way you can tell them hey, you guys got to update that.
Yeah, I think it's probably my Instagram because I haven't been there in a while.
Okay, that's all for me, Tim. It's all yours.
Amazing, amazing.
Thank you.
Let me share my screen then. I have a deck, and I think it'll be fun to go through it. But it's not a formal thing. So can everyone see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, perfect, excellent.
Yes,
So
it
let's go
works.
into slideshow mode. Dreamforce just finished last week, and when I was asked what topic I'd talk about, I kind of looked at the dates and time, and I realized, oh wow, this is immediately after Dreamforce, and it's a good opportunity to talk about it because a general theme over the last 2 years is that I think everyone will agree that Salesforce has had a growing impact on Tableau since the acquisition, and no more than the last year or two that that impact has been huge in lots of positive and some less positive ways as well. And I think it's really super important to start sort of paying more attention to the Salesforce narrative and how that then plays out in the Tableau ecosystem. Because before, Tableau was an independent product, And you could essentially just pay attention to the Tableau blogs, the Tableau community forums, the Tableau visionaries, the Tableau ambassadors, and you get a good sense of where the platform is going. But now with Salesforce in the mix, there's a lot more technologies that now have to plug into Tableau. And I think that direction is a little bit harder to sort of pass out. So I wanted to play through Dreamforce to pull some of those themes out of the main Salesforce narrative, but then see how they play out in the Tableau ecosystem paired with some of the historical information that we've had from conference as well. And so I've broken that down into a few themes, and these themes are what I'll go through today. So I'm going to contextualize the Salesforce context, a really bad sentence, but anyway. We're going to talk about AI in the Salesforce context, because of course you've seen a lot about AI in the Tableau sphere, but to understand that, I think you have to understand AI in the Salesforce context. Einstein 1, Salesforce always liked to brand their products and capabilities, and this was by far the biggest thing that kind of came from Dreamforce that also presented itself inside of the Tableau communication. And then a framing of Tableau's direction. And you might already sort of softly be aware of this, or you might not have any sort of visibility of this whatsoever, but it's been very clear in the last 6 months that Tableau is squarely pointing at its let's say the incumbent customer, which was people like us building dashboards, and it's clearly saying to everyone, we're trying to go for the people who don't build dashboards. All our innovations and our pushes in the future are going to help people who don't build dashboards. We're going to give them the tools to build their own metrics, build their own views, build their own sort of perspectives on data, and that's where our focus is going to be. So what does that look like? Then Tableau Pulse and Einstein Copilot as well, following in from that. So it's pretty chronological based on how the keynote was done. And the way I've done that is I've pulled slides from the keynote, from different keynotes, and I've kind of rearranged them and I've grouped them together into these themes to tell a better chronological story. Okay, so Salesforce context. I didn't actually notice this. Tableau have been using this slide all the way through, but I actually went back to a bunch of Dreamforces and I realized that I was seeing this slide from about 2020, and actually it's a Salesforce slide that had been converted to the sort of Tableau ecosystem. And Salesforce it's the same curve, it's always in the same gradient, and it's always interesting. Like if you look back 5 years, surely some sort of change is happening. It can't always be exponential, but it was a way for Tableau to sort of highlight the changes over the last few years. And you can kind of see Tableau since 2003 to where we are today, 20 years old, a whole ton of innovation and achievements. And what's interesting about this timeline is they've put Salesforce Einstein in here, but that was never part of this Tableau ecosystem. It's kind of been snuck in here in 2015. I only noticed that recently, but Salesforce truly sort of became part of the Tableau narrative here in 2020. That's when I think that's roughly when the acquisition played through. You never really know when these things are done because there's a bunch of pre-talk and then there's a bunch of post activity. So the actual date when the filing closes, but the actual point at which teams start to change and focuses start to play out is never clear. And I think that's also true with the product. On day one, we didn't see like a whole ton of Salesforce features. They actually started coming in over time. And so they roughly fall into this red box that I've drawn out. And, in this slide, Ryan called out 160 plus new capabilities since 2002. He's technically considering 2022.4 in that count because he's kind of looking back from the previous Dreamforce. And so if you go to that point and you look forward, it is roughly 160 capabilities. I like to validate these facts. And the way I did that, if I just hop out of this and I go to something called the Tableau Release Navigator, I think I've got a link here baked in, and we'll just go to this. This is a really useful tool. In essence, what it is, it's made by Tableau themselves. It's kind of a replacement of release notes in some respects. And it's updated with every release, and it's also available in different languages. I'll show you that in a second. And by default, it's plugged into the latest version. But what you can do is, if let's say you're coming from, let's say 2022.1, you can just go and take all the releases since that version. And then what you can do is you can then tell this tool, okay, what offering do you have access to? What products are you interested in? And what status? The status just simply tells you whether the feature is new, changed, or deprecated. And then from there, you can kind of go through this list, and you can, if I select all of this, it actually comes to something like 283. But some of those are changes, some of those are enhancements, and you're really looking at the new features. And then there's also deprecated features in here. But that number is more or less, give or take, pretty accurate. So this is a good way of actually looking at Tableau from the perspective of what version you're on today. If you're going to upgrade, what are you going to get? But also, if you've had Tableau maybe say for 5 years, you want to say, well, what does Tableau deliver? This is actually a good way of looking at that. And then you can download the data source from this. It's a workbook you can edit. Obviously, go ahead, download it, pull the raw data, restructure it how you want. And you can tell a better story about how Tableau's made an impact on your own setup. So I think it's a good tool to be aware of, and I always like to sort of highlight it whenever Tableau talk about features, because I think it's a good context. So generally speaking, those features are pretty accurate, and I think the thing I've always critiqued is that in some cases enhancements to me don't always count as new features, but I understand why they are that, because of course you develop the product and things change. But on the same token, there have been other features which don't necessarily sit in everyone's infrastructure, especially if you're a Tableau only shop, you don't have Salesforce. It's really important to be able to sort of contextualize, well, those new features are great, but how many of them really help me as a data analyst or as a user or as a business? So something that I think people have to do individually. So I always encourage they do that. And so if we pull back to the original question, what's Salesforce's focus? I think it's pretty obvious, I think, at this conference. Salesforce really is truly bought into the AI revolution. And I can't really quite trace, other than ChatGPT, I can't really quite trace the original point at which Salesforce sort of started going on this. Because I think in the early days, predictive analytics, generative technology, all of this was actually happening in the background. The big difference is that, the innovation that ChatGPT maybe brought to the whole technology space was the fact that someone spent the money and time showing people how to train a good model. And now that that template's out there, you've seen an explosion of models, not just ChatGPT 4, but other models by Google, other models by other companies. And now everyone sort of now perceptually has a North Star to head to. And for Salesforce, their whole vision is about bringing this technology in, paired not just by ChatGPT, but they've also got the option of using Google's offering, which is kind of twofold. You've maybe heard of Google Bard, that's sort of the consumer-facing product, but there's something called Google Vertex, which is Google's take on what ChatGPT is offering for enterprise customers. So there's two versions of this technology you can start to play with, and Salesforce is actually pledging to support both. And so they want to help businesses sort of bridge this gap. I always like the way that Salesforce show themselves on here. Salesforce Cloud, hence the AI experience you want is in the cloud. Very subtle marketing. But actually, many of the concerns on here and many of the points people raise are absolutely true. And again, Salesforce wants to present itself as the company that can help you solve these challenges, can give you the tools to solve these challenges. And even if you're not a Salesforce customer, they can hopefully entice you into the ecosystem to use their tools to do that. Okay. And so they have what I would call an AI brand. And it's not radically new. Einstein is terminology that's been around for a while. It's always been their sort of data science sort of brand, as it were. And it's slowly morphed into lots of different things. But they, at Dreamforce, they launched this concept called the Einstein One platform. And this is a platform that exists across all Salesforce tools. And this diagram is actually a good way of conceptualizing how Salesforce looks at their platform. Ultimately, you have Einstein on the right, which is this sort of, let's call it AI data science wing. And then you've got Data Cloud on the left, which is this, I haven't used Data Cloud, but it's this capability of bringing your data in, creating models and relationships between them, and then making all of that work so you can actually do work with your data through their services, which is what you see across the middle: sales, service, marketing, e-commerce, analytics, and platform. And then you have metadata that kind of lives within that ecosystem. You have user-facing apps like Tableau, Slack at the top, and then you've got things that allow you to connect to various technologies like MuleSoft and the App Exchange as well. And so in this sort of narrative, they keep playing, with this issue of trust. And they kind of this Francois actually went through this slide and he spoke more points to this, but in essence, they are pretty much guaranteeing all the concerns that most people would have with this technology. They're doing it. They'd like to think they're doing it the right way. The difficult thing is that this is also an evolving ecosystem. So the right way will not be the same today as it will be in 3 months. So it's actually okay to make this pledge, but actually you've got to listen again to the messaging in 6 months. Make sure you're keeping in track with the trends and understand what is now best practice, because this industry is really only exploded in the last 6 months. So best practice is probably yet to be built, even though people maybe have a concept of how it could work. And so just briefly, this is sort of how they envisage Einstein and AI models working. So CRM apps on the left-hand side, you have to sort of think of CRM apps to include Tableau. It's like Tableau is actually part of that ecosystem. And so what they have is this Einstein trust layer in the middle, which essentially takes your prompt, does some processing to basically demask it, remove any identifiable information. And then over on the right-hand side, they have basically two worlds: hosted models, which Salesforce essentially hosts and runs and manages. And in essence, that's a relationship between you and Salesforce. And then you have this other perspective, which is external models, which have a shared boundary essentially. So this could be, for example, if you're running your own version of a model outside of the Salesforce ecosystem, doing something but feeding back into the system. And then as that data comes back in, there's a little bit of auditability and understanding of what's going on before it comes back into the CRM app. So you've got an element of traceability. And so this is the conceptual diagram. I'm certain it doesn't work exactly like this. It's far more complex. But it then speaks to what they want you to do on the other side, which is the data cloud. So bring in, harmonize your data. So it's kind of like a split narrative. You can trust us to work with AI because this is how we're going to do it, and this is how we're going to ensure you're safe. And so because of that, you can really trust the platform and bring your data in, regardless of where it is, whether it's AWS, Snowflake, Databricks, Google Cloud. It's always interesting that most companies now only talk about the cloud data sources. Strange to see AWS and Snowflake and Databricks next to each other. But nonetheless, all of those platforms, they want you to bring their data in. Those are the platforms they have partnerships with. And what that means is there's technology like zero copy technology, which means your data is never leaving that platform and it's all working within the system. So trying to reach to how does this impact Tableau? Well, Einstein 1 is the brand. Einstein 1 Copilot is the AI sort of facing assistant as part of that brand. And then Einstein 1 as a concept lives within all of the ecosystems. So you can see on the right-hand side, all the other Salesforce ecosystems. But here we've got Einstein 1 and Tableau, which specifically speaks to the capabilities that we're going to see in Tableau in the future. And so very briefly, that's Tableau Pulse, Copilot for Tableau, and then intelligent apps. Okay, so I'll go through those in a little bit more detail. And so to help people kind of understand how to get this working, there's an offering for not just free data cloud, but free Tableau licenses as well for customers of a specific size. Now, this deck is actually pitched to a Salesforce user, right? Which is why it says free data cloud and Tableau. I'm wondering what the reverse of this deck looked like for someone who's already a Tableau customer. I would love to know what kind of relationship you'd have to have with Tableau as a Tableau customer in order to get access to cloud, to sort of dip your toes and see how it works. I've gone to the webpage, but I haven't gone through the mechanics and actually even seen a customer go through this process, so I can't speak to that. But if this is sort of true to what it's saying with the caveats that are highlighted here, then it could be a really good way of people actually testing some of these capabilities and getting their toes wet so that they can understand what to do with the platform. So how does that help with framing Tableau's direction, and how does that help in general? Now, if I rewind back to conference, Tableau conference, not Dreamforce, there was a really deliberate effort made to position Tableau away from dashboarding, away from having analysts do all the scaling up of basically analytical infrastructure. And it couldn't have been more blatant in this conference. It was actually easy to miss, but at the same time, it was very bold. And all the way through, all the way through, whether it was Ryan on stage or Francois in his speech, both of them in their speech, they kept on talking about then and now, the past and the future. And so I sort of pulled all these slides into one place. And so at the very beginning, Ryan talked about 20 years. We focused on analysts. Next horizon is everyone else. That's exactly the same narrative that we started the previous conference with. And actually, in the previous conference, they spent about 5 minutes really drumming the point home, but softly, obviously. And then throughout the keynote, they talked about different workflows and different kinds of people they wanted to help. So you can see here, reaching people with AI, making data exploration easy with AI, and staying in the flow of work with AI. And what those three workflows really represent are what they see as their future customers. So analysts have always been at the core of Tableau, Tableau Desktop, Tableau Prep, power tools for analysts who know what they're doing with data, can describe, can work, can model data, can do whatever they need to, put it to server and share that with people so they can go and consume dashboards or whatever they want to consume. On the left and on the right, you kind of see a new framing of who Tableau wants to focus on going forward. So business users. Now, I think analysts and business users are the same thing. I never know what the difference really is. I think what we mean by analyst is data analysts, whereas business users are just analysts and managers in the business doing what they do. And then on the right-hand side, you've got Salesforce CRM users, so people who have Salesforce, who are using it to manage their sales pipeline or whatever other service or marketing capability they have. And so they map those capabilities to these specific capabilities. So for business users, metrics and insights for everyone. So that's essentially Tableau Pulse. For people like you and me who build dashboards or maybe work with Tableau intimately, data exploration made easier, make it easier for us to get to insight. And then for the right-hand side, people who are using Salesforce a lot, analytics in the flow of work. That is, you never have to leave Salesforce to look at Tableau analytics. You can literally bring the Tableau platform into Salesforce and use it all within, and even go from Salesforce directly to things like desktop in a single click, rather than having to create data sources and pipe your data from here to there. Make that sort of experience seamless and very easy to use. And so that brings us to the first feature, Tableau Pulse. I should have said, if you've got questions, put them in the Q&A and we'll get to them in the end. I forgot to say that right at the beginning, so I'll say it now. So Tableau Pulse. Tableau Pulse is super interesting because we saw this at conference. It's nothing radically new. We'd actually seen it a little bit before conference, but this is the first feature that's going to drop. Technically not true. It's the first main feature that's going to drop this year. So this because it says GA December 23, what this means is it's 23.4. So I think it's going to sneak in just after Christmas, just before January, because we still haven't got 23.3 yet. So if you think of the timeframes in between that, realistically, we're talking about late December. And Tableau Pulse is a pretty interesting capability because it challenges a lot of paradigms in the analytical flow today. And it also challenges maybe people who've been building dashboards a lot in the past, people who model data a lot in the past, to rethink what they're going to need to do to enable end users in the future. And so to understand that, what I've done is I've sort of pulled out some features from Tableau Pulse that have been demoed on stage and have been shown to us so far. I always have to caveat that my perception is that those demos are either very early versions of the product or conceptual mocks of the product. So they're either still building this and they've started to get beta testers and users out there. If you know the answer to that, let me know. Or they are showing us a conceptual direction. And when the feature releases, it might not have everything we're seeing today, but this is the North Star. This is where they're heading. Okay. So I can't speak to Tableau on that. I don't know what they're going to think. I don't know what they say. Even though I'm part of various programs, they don't sort of give that kind of forward context. So this is purely my guess. I keep reiterating that in case someone snips this and says Tableau Tim said this. So what I did a while back is I drew a diagram to kind of showcase, look, this is the world today as I see it, and then this is the future. And this diagram is wrong. That's why it's a work in progress. I think I put it in a video, and I'm still sort of chewing through it because until I see the features, I'm not going to really know where things sit. But on the left-hand side, as a very simple diagram, you have your data sources on the bottom, you have desktop and prep and server and cloud, and then you have end users. And you can think of these as distinct sort of parts of Tableau. Now, that is massively simplified, but that's sort of where we are today. At the last conference, there was this concept called Tableau GPT. And I think Tableau GPT might just be Einstein 1, but rebranded. So Einstein 1 for Tableau, I think is Tableau GPT. Because at the same time we saw Tableau GPT, we also saw Salesforce GPT. We also saw Commerce GPT. So essentially they added GPT onto the end of all the terms. And I think that didn't ring true with customers. I think customers really struggled with that identification because you've heard of Chat GPT and you think, oh, we're just going to go and bung everything GPT. But my hunch is that it's Tableau GPT is Einstein 1. And this is a technology that sits around the whole entire platform. And so on the right, you have what I think is the future. So the idea is that you build your data sources. Well, first of all, you have your data sources in the databases or wherever they're coming from. And then there is a modeling or flow perspective. And now modeling in this context also just refers to the connection window in desktop. So when I say data modeling, I just mean building your data model in Tableau desktop, if it's as simple as that. In other cases, it's more complex, where you might need to do some data prep and some sort of work in the warehouse to get it to the setup you want. And then after that, traditionally, you would then go to dashboarding and visualization. But there's actually going to be essentially 2 steps before that. The first one is something called defining your metrics. And then the other one is an API on the right-hand side to something called VizQL Data Service. Now, VizQL Data Service was announced at the previous conference. And this is actually the underlying technology that's enabling Tableau Pulse. So the way to think of VizQL Data Service is it's like the API that is powering Tableau Pulse in order for it to load and understand the metrics. When you define your metrics in Tableau Pulse, you're essentially constructing a query of some sort, and that is being fed to VizQL Data Service to use an API to extract the data from your data model or your data source. So whether it's a data model you've built in Tableau or a flow output, a published data source, or a database, all of this is going to be accessible through VizQL Data Service. That's the theory anyway from conference. We haven't seen it yet. I think the idea is that this will get launched next year. So they said early to mid next year, 2024. And Tableau Pulse and metrics are going to give the users the ability to define their own metrics. And so they can start to sort of build their own worlds and perspectives on data, which means I think as data analysts, we need to start thinking more about, well, how do we bring in the necessary metadata and data structure to enable people to build the metrics they want? And so if we look at the way that Tableau sort of showcased, this is a very early mock, and this was definitely in something like Figma. This wasn't like a working version because you can see the tool has evolved since this demo. But on the left, you can kind of see an interface of how you could define metrics in Tableau Pulse. And then as you define these metrics, what you're actually doing is providing Tableau the necessary context and metadata in order to essentially monitor a metric on your behalf. Once you give it this, there's this concept that is, I think, quite interesting, which is creating a dedicated landing experience for the individual user. And so let's imagine you've created 20 of these metrics and you follow maybe 15 or 20 of them, and you're only really passionate about 3 of them. And that's what you're seeing here. You've got device sales, inventory fill rate, and regional revenue. They've all been predefined at specific levels. You'll notice underneath each title, they have a date context and a regional context, and in some cases a category context. So you'll see here, device sales says week to date, North America. That is actually a filter within the metric, okay? And what a user does is they go in and specify, I would like to look at this specific time context, this specific region, and then they save that as a metric. And now Tableau's got that sort of combination of metric and context locked in, and that's the comparison it monitors for you, which is kind of nice because in dashboards, you had to give the user the ability to toggle between that. But with metrics, you can kind of scale that up much faster with small perspectives of how to use this. Now, metrics have existed before. They needed dashboards in order to work, but in essence, this new feature is pretty much going to knock that out of the park by the looks of things, powered with a little bit of AI magic. Now, the other thing that's easy to miss with this is if you look at the top section, that paragraph is actually doing, I think, something pretty special. And if Tableau pull this off, I think this could be an absolutely huge deal. What this sentence is basically saying, look, it's gone through all the metrics you care about, and it's literally coming back to you and saying, hey, device sales had an unusual spike at the start of the week, while inventory rate is underperforming this month. In the meantime, regional revenue has been steadily climbing. Additionally, 8 of your other 12 metrics have changed, 5 in a good direction, 3 in a bad direction. Now, that is a summary that I don't think any Tableau wielding guru, even visionaries around the world, have been able to sort of figure out a way of creating for the end user without giving them either a collection or a project or something to go to. And the powerful thing is Tableau is sending this to the user in lots of different places. I'll show you that in a minute. But it's giving them the choice to define what they care about, at what level they care about. And then on top of that, there's this sort of segmentation. So when you look at a specific metric here on the right-hand side, there's a little bit more detail about the context, and you can actually go into that, and you can almost have a conversation with that. And that's where the AI. Oh, I missed this slide, which is where you can do this in Slack, in Gmail, phone. And if you look at all these slides in detail, if you go back to the net and just look at these in detail, you can actually see that this narrative is essentially like a page. It's not just one sentence. It's actually a piece of context at the top with the summary below of all the different metrics you care about. And so the AI comes into this because what you're then able to do is when you click on device sales and you want to interrogate the change a little bit, you can actually start to use that chat GPT technology we're sort of familiar with and use it to ask questions and say, okay, if we've had an increase in these units, do we have the ability to fulfill this orders? Now, if you think of that question, you're just simply asking a natural question to say, hey, can I actually meet these orders? And what Tableau GPT or Einstein 1 is doing is it's passing that, turning that into a query, and it's essentially going and also building you the context. And it's not only able to do that, it's also able to suggest the questions. It's not obvious on here, but if you look around the screen, you'll see this little star icon and you'll see questions it's suggesting. So those do the same thing as typing the question in at the top. And then if you actually hit enter in any one of those questions or any one of those pieces of context, you get an additional chart to show you if your inventory is going up or if any specific behavior is going up. So it actually gives people the ability to drill in and work in I think, a more accessible way, in a more accessible language, without putting up this barrier of having to know which report has that information. Tableau is doing the hard work of piecing together that narrative, just using its understanding of language through this new technology to kind of help you out. So that is, I think, a pretty powerful capability for everyday people. There's a lot more complexity to this, especially when it comes to things like language, business terminology. I've worked in contexts where we look at, like, say, return on investment. That's one term, but different departments might look at return on investment differently as different metrics. So you're going to have like 20 metrics that all say ROI, and then you're going to have to say finance ROI. You're going to say production ROI, logistics ROI, all these different things. How are they going to keep that simple and not make it as much of a mess as we've seen today with dashboards where you have different cuts or different custom views or all that kind of stuff? So really hard stuff to do. I'm keen to see how they sort of play it out. So that's Tableau Pulse. There's plenty more I could talk about. So maybe ask a question if you're keen to know more, and we'll look at that soon. And then Einstein Copilot. Let me just track the time. Einstein Copilot is, I think, what maybe you and I will love the most. I think this is going to be super interesting. I'm really keen to see how we can break this. I'm also worried about what nasty calculations we're going to find because in the demo, they showed 2 examples. Tableau prep, you're going into a column, you don't know how to do something, you want to extract the postcode from a field, cool. Go and ask Einstein Copilot and it will tell you, oh yeah, I think regex will do this for you. Here's a regex formula. Do you want to use it? Yes, you put it in and out it takes the formula for you. I could already do this with chat GPT today. You just have to have two browser tabs open and you can more or less recreate this experience. You might have a little bit of an issue if you're using data that's private. So I think what most people are doing is creating sample data, testing that in chat GPT, seeing if it works, and coming back and using that model inside of Tableau. And yeah, you can get chat GPT today to write calculations and help you think through problems already, without a doubt. What I think is more interesting is helping us build charts and explore data. So Einstein Copilot is something that's coming next year. And this is super interesting because what Tableau want to do is help you start thinking about what questions to ask and help you explore your data. So on the right-hand side, you can see an interface. And this is essentially the starting point. So you can open up a data set with no chart, and Einstein will already come to you and say, "Yeah, here are 3 interesting things that I think you could ask about your data set." And when you click on those, it builds a chart, as you can see on the left, and it allows you to start, going down a journey. And the interesting thing is you can have this sort of conversational experience, right? So you can ask a question, you can go to a chart, and then if you want to keep analyzing it, you can build another chart, another tab. And actually, this mimics the way I think I build dashboards. I ask lots of questions, I build lots of tabs out. Then I try and see which of these tabs are useful. I maybe junk half of them, I iterate a few more, then we bring them into a dashboard. This is almost the same thing, but it's almost super powered by the fact that you don't have to know what to ask to have it build a chart. For example, in this chart here, what's actually happening is you've got the store locations and you've got the customer locations. And what you want to do is you want to see how many customers are near a specific store. And it's going to use the map layers capability. It's layered the 2 different bits of information on each other. It's also put the right things in filters and on detail to get that to work. And it's built the chart without you having to do anything. Now, you and me, most people in this call could probably figure out how to do this fairly quickly. But to someone who's never built anything in Tableau, having that kind of capability is just going to amplify what they're doing. Also, if you're an expert and you know what you're doing, this could be a really sort of low code way of just, well, no code way of actually just exploring ideas and asking it, hey, what could you do with this? And of course, version 1 of these are never great. But if you've used for example, ChatGPT, what was called code interpreter is now called advanced data analyst, a big hint for where where it's been successful. That tool is getting incredibly good incredibly quickly, and it's still laughable at times, but it's actually also incredibly good most of the time if you ask good questions in the way that it likes. So I'm super interested in how this is going to work, but this is still a long way out. 2024 was the general sort of direction on this. And then what that kind of leads to is this, I guess, challenge, because this is very easy to sort of get excited about these new and exciting things. But there are always these things in the background, right? Especially since the Salesforce acquisition, which is there is often increasingly a dependency on Tableau Cloud for some of these features. And sometimes in a dependency on Salesforce. Sometimes you get features that only work with data inside of the Salesforce platform, which is interesting. Um, Data modeling effort, I think, is going to be quite big. We work in a world where I think if you're in an enterprise setup, you maybe have a lot of atomized data sources, and lots of those data sources are maybe doing the same thing because analysts are empowered to go out and build what they need to enable reports. But when you start to think about metrics and you want everyone to have the right perspective of the same metric, you kind of need everyone working off the same data source. And so the implications for data modeling, which I can't spell on here, is super, super important. I can't stress that enough. Like, you can have all the AI in the world, but if the data quality is not good, then your AI is never going to be useful. You won't even be able to get it to a place where you can use it well. And I think Salesforce and Tableau call this out. But I think the jury's still out on how many companies are truly resourced to meet the scale of the demand if the AI tool is as good as it is, right? I think you're going to need a lot more data modeling skills. Whereas before you were doing a lot of dashboarding and doing a lot of calculations inside of Tableau, maybe lookups and all these LODs and stuff, you're going to need to move that knowledge out of the workbook and into the data model and start to understand how that works. There's always the question about cloud versus server disparity. If you go to the release navigator and you look at the cloud features and you look at the server features, well, for a starter, server is only out twice a year, so it's a little bit of a slower release. And then secondly, cloud does have more features coming to it first and earlier and at a faster pace. It's just the nature of where Tableau is going. And I think Tableau said that I think a couple of years ago, cloud became the bigger product. So cloud is their bigger product. I think most new customers of Tableau start with Tableau Cloud. And I don't know what this number is, but if you did the 20 years of Tableau, I'd love to know sort of what the bell curve is for when most of the customers became Tableau customers. I'm thinking it's in the last 3 or 4 years. And I think majority of those customers, big customers especially, are on Tableau Cloud. And you have a long tail of much older long-term customers who are on Tableau Server with huge servers that need to come to the cloud, but cloud doesn't quite have the feature set because they've grown to the scale where they need those features. And then the last thing is there's no roadmap really beyond mid next year. There's a lot of talk about future releases, but some of what I'm showing you isn't even going to be available next year. So in the meantime, what's the roadmap around that? What's the roadmap to allow us to have tools to actually answer all these tough questions? And yeah, and that's sort of where I stop. Where are we doing for time? Yeah, should be good for time. So if I come out of this is where I go to the call, and I realized that I hung up 10 minutes ago or something. So yeah, so now is probably a good time for questions if there's any.
Yeah, you're good with time. Sometimes we go over the hour because we don't want to stop anybody from talking. But you're well under, so we're good. Um,
Good.
let's see. I know I had a question
Yeah.
with all the AI and ML capabilities that are out there. Have you been able to successfully implement that into a dashboard or a project?
So I into a project, yes. So this is two interesting questions. So you can't really put. I have used ChatGPT to help me solve a problem inside of a dashboard. Yes. I specifically helped it use it to help me with regex because that's the one thing I never want to learn and I can never remember it every single time. But it was effective and it worked, and regex was generally the right answer. In another context, I've used it extensively to help me work with a REST API. So I use it to work with the Tableau Python REST API. And that was super interesting because although I had some experience of that in the past and I've used it, um, I didn't have what I would consider like a super intimate knowledge of it. And ChatGPT, as long as you gave it the context, I'm talking about GPT-4 here, as long as you gave it the context that you were specifically talking about the Tableau, REST API, whatever, it was actually pretty good at narrowing down to what it needed to do to help you, to the point where you could use it as long as you understand what you're doing with the Python library and you know what you're looking at, and you can critique it and say, this is wrong and that looks right. Let's try that. No, that didn't work because of this. As long as you could have that back and forth, it was absolutely solid. So these tools still need you to be able to understand what's going on. Like I couldn't have had that interaction if I couldn't look at it and say, no, that's wrong, that's right. But I think a lot of people think that it's going to do the entire piece and say, here's a working piece of code out of the gate. You might spend 40 minutes going back and forth with one prompt to get it right. And that's sort of what the expectation needs to be. But in one day, you'll go much further than if you'd started from scratch.
Yeah, I've done the same thing with ChatGPT, trying to figure out calculations. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
I keep saying what you gave me didn't work.
Yeah.
Try again, and then it'll give me something else, and I'll try that, and then
Yeah.
eventually I'll
Yeah.
find an answer by mixing the two or something. But to your point, it gives you
Yeah.
those ideas of like, okay, I didn't think of doing that. Let me do that, and eventually
Exactly.
we'll get it to work.
Exactly. Yeah.
Another question I had was, for those companies that are like on-prem servers,
Yeah.
they're usually a few years behind what the current version is due to
Correct.
security
Yeah.
and their concerns and whatnot. With all of
Yeah.
this new AI stuff that's coming on, how far out do you think it takes for companies to try to implement some of that internally?
So this is a really good question. I recently made a video about how I think features need to change, and I think a bit unpopular, I think, because I think what I said in the video is that um, features need to come out in bigger batches rather than being sort of drip fed. And the reason is because of exactly this. I think it takes the typical organization six months if they're fast, 8 months to a year if they're quick and if they plan it out to go through an entire sort of upgrade cycle. By that I mean deciding when you're going to do it, getting the skills and or people and resources, testing it on your infrastructure, deploying the test, and then the 3 or 4 months after you've deployed, fixing all the bugs, keeping on top of all the patches, going through anything that's broken, engaging support. That cycle is actually longer than just the activity of upgrading. And so that's why I think companies upgrade every 2 years, because it's just a lot of work. And that's ideally why Tableau would like you to go to the cloud, because that doesn't
Mhm.
exist. And although the cloud has issues sometimes you do get bugs, they fix them like lightning fast, because if there's an issue in cloud, everyone's having the issue and they hear about it. So I think it takes a while for everyone to get these features. I think the AI features won't come to server out of the gate, because the implication there is going to need you to do one of two things. Either have the capability to run these models on-prem, which for some organizations might be a stretch too far because it requires a lot of resources. Whereas centrally, you can actually govern that pretty well. Salesforce will have relationships with AWS, who will have relationships with NVIDIA, who have all the hardware that run this stuff. And then the other option is you can run it on server, but it needs to communicate with something in the cloud. And then businesses now ask the other question, which is, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, where are you sending my data? What exactly are you sending? That diagram I showed at the beginning, right? That diagram. Like, how is my on-prem server interacting with your cloud technology? Are you training your model on my data? How can you guarantee that you're not keeping this? What compliance standards do you have? So for that reason, I think it will just take even longer for some of these features to come to on-prem, because I think those questions Tableau might have an answer out the gate, but it just takes companies time to go through the due diligence to kind of verify that. And then on top of that, you've got the upgrade cycle as well.
Hmm. Do you see a time when, again, a years from now, when they will phase out Tableau server altogether and everything will only be on cloud?
Yeah. So interestingly, they can't do that because there are some contexts where you can't be in the cloud, right? So if you look at banking, sometimes regulations there require you to have things in a firewalled or air gapped situation for security and safety purposes. If you look at the military and government, they have to have their technology on completely separate sort of infrastructure. So I think there'll always be a use case for Tableau server, but I think what will increasingly become the response from Tableau as they migrate more and more features that you want from server to cloud is I'll say, this is the better way to do it. We're not going to support that. We're going to support it over here. And I think they'll force you to make that decision much sooner. So I don't think they'll ever stop server, but I think they'll say, okay, that feature, it's really hard for us to do it on-prem. We're going to make it cloud only.
Hmm.
Take your pick, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's all the questions I had. I did want to highlight that sometimes in some of your videos you bring up some of the roadblocks and the user issues that a lot of people are having. I wanted
Yeah.
to thank you for doing that because you have a public figure and people know who you are. You can speak for the rest of us, so I appreciate that you're able to like push back, because most blogs and most videos are like everything's
That's
sunshines and
absolutely
butterflies. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's a funny line to draw because on the same on the same token, as soon as I do one of those videos where I absolutely go in on something, the very next day the product manager for that feature messages me, and
Yes.
then I have to I have to dance to my comments and kind of I
Yeah.
don't walk them back, but I have to sort of be slightly more I have to be more constructive, because then the next question they ask me is, how would you fix it? And I'm like, oh God, okay. So
Yeah.
on one hand, it's one thing to kind of critique. The other problem is coming up with a solution. And
Yeah.
the second element of that is they work in product development, right? So what we sometimes forget when we think about features is, this is a product. Why doesn't it have this feature? But actually, in Tableau, there are tons of talented product managers and developers who've thought way ahead and have scouted all the possible solutions for so many things. It amazes me every time. The issue isn't, can they find a way to fix it or can they do it? The actual issue is, how is Salesforce prioritizing those features through the development cycle? And long story short, if it doesn't make the cut, they can't work on it, even if they have an idea or a way forward. So I think you always have to remember that. And we kind of confuse that with, oh, Tableau's not thinking about this. They're not paying attention. They are, but yeah, it's a product and products go through cycles, right? So
Right.
yeah.
And there's things in the back end that we're never going to know about, and they've already thought about it. So yeah, I get it.
I tell you, I have demoed features to audiences thinking they're going to get released, and they've been canned. I think my most
funny.
famous example is Snap to Grid for the grid capability inside of dashboard layout. So you can enable a grid, but one of the things I was like, why can't you snap to grid? That would obviously be a much nicer experience, because then if you're not using containers, you could just snap to grid and get everything nicely lined up. It was in the product ever so briefly, but it just didn't make the cut, and then it got
Yeah.
removed. And I was like, oh, damn it.
That-
I won't tell you the mechanism to find out what's in the product that's not shipped. I'd get in trouble, but there is one. So
yeah.
go
Well,
look
put
for
it
it.
put it in the community and let people vote on it. Right.
There are in the community forums. If you look hard enough, you'll find what I'm talking about. It's not really a
Okay.
secret, but yeah.
All right. I had two other questions. Someone wanted to know like how all this, the things you were talking about, how that would help a small nonprofit.
Yeah.
grassroots organization. So if you
Yeah.
talk on that.
Yeah. So I think Tableau Pulse, I think, in my opinion, has genuinely the biggest opportunity to help smaller organizations, because in reality small organizations, and I'm not saying all nonprofits are small, but I think they work in a more my experience of having worked in a nonprofit is they work in on maybe say problem sets that are smaller, so you don't have these sort of large enterprise databases with everything in one place. What you tend to have is mission-led data sources and initiatives, and those work at the kind of level that small businesses work at, if that makes sense. And so this ability to define metrics without needing someone to build dashboards, I think, is going to be a huge game changer, because I think people can define metrics very well. You've all been to meetings where you've talked about how you should cut some sort of metric, and business users are very good at actually talking in that language. The difficult thing is then bringing that back to the data. And so if they get the interface for Pulse right, and it's really able to cut into those levels of details and filters and context with dates and categories, and really customize that down, but keep it lighthearted so business users feel like they can interact with it, that's going to help everyone. So yeah, I think there will be a beta of this at some point. So I'd encourage everyone to find a data set that they might want to use and try and see how it goes. It's one of those challenges where you need time for Pulse to work. You can't just go Superstore. You can't use Superstore to demo Pulse. It wouldn't work, because the whole point of Pulse is it's tracking changes over time. Like, that's the whole sort of problem. So to demo Pulse, you need, I think, four months worth of data, where the data is coming in on a daily basis and you're seeing those deltas being pinged to you in your inbox. That's sort of the whole point of Pulse.
Good answer. Thanks. I appreciate that. Last question is someone's having issues with old databases and then breaking things. Do you have any videos that talk about editing of very layered databases?
I don't. So database is a tough one, because the number one, every database under the sun has its own way of doing things. And I don't know if there's a specific database that person is referring to. I can see the question, but I don't know if they've referred to a specific database. But what I will say is, I think quite often we are sometimes looking for databases to solve problems that are quite difficult to solve in a database, but are maybe quite easy to solve in a modeling tool like Prep or Alteryx. Now, Prep comes obviously with a creator license. Alteryx is a separate license, another product entirely, another story, another day. But I think if you look for dynamic ways of just getting past the problem, so you can enable what's going on in the dashboard, you can kind of get better buy-in to go back and solve that problem at the root cause. So often ideas get killed because you kind of get stuck at that sort of first layer. So Charles is saying, I think Margaret is talking about very layered dashboards. What's the context there? I don't know. Maybe I'm misunderstanding the concept of layered. So calc is dependent on a different calc. Oh, I see. So you've got like nested metrics. I think that's what I'd call that. Is that a fair read of that, Aaron? Or yes, okay,
Probably.
Yeah. All right. God, nested metrics. That is a tough one. I've actually asked Tableau how they'd deal with this for Pulse, but with how do I deal with nested metrics personally? I never have a perfect answer. What I've done in the past is I've always tried to push at least the first layer of calculations as far back as I can into the data source. And then in Tableau, I've always been, well, at least pretty, let's call it, disciplined about how I structure my calculations, so that if I have to deal with a lot of that in Tableau, you can maybe look at things like the data model. You can potentially look at the way extracts work and interact with the data source to kind of speed some of that up and make some of that a little bit simpler. But there's no magic bullet. Eventually, if you're doing a lot of calculations in your workbook, it's because you can't do it in the data model, and you're kind of being forced to do it at the Tableau layer, which is not always the best place to do all of them. So I don't know. I feel like a cop-out answer there, but I'm just being honest. But yeah, like I think it's just a difficult problem. I don't think you're doing anything wrong. If I'm right, I don't know what other people think, but yeah.
Yeah, there's no easy way to do it. No, like, do follow these steps and that'll solve it for you.
Yeah. So in terms of speeding up a dashboard, a calc heavy dashboard, there's definitely some steps. There's multiple tools that are available. One tool that is available is there's an optimization tool that got added to the publish options. I forget what it's called. But it gives you like a checklist of things to check, and it actually checks your workbook and gives you like out of 12, out of the 20 things I checked, look, you've got problems with these three. That's a good place to start, and it gives you a learn more link on each of those. I've covered that as a feature. That's a separate sort of feature. The next thing is there's an acceleration tool for server and cloud, where if you've got really calc heavy workbooks, what it can do, depending on how the calculations are set up, it can almost pre-cache the output. So it's not going to make the dashboard run faster, but because on cloud and server, a user has gone to it already, and that's what this tool does, it loads a little bit faster on that initial load. And then when someone filters it down, the filter kind of cuts the query down, and then it still runs faster. So that's another feature that can help. But maybe what I'll do is maybe I'll try and find the videos and send them to Aaron, and then maybe you can share them with you, Charles.
Sure can
Yeah.
do. All right, that's all we had. It's 1 o'clock here. What time is it there?
It's 6 p.m.
6 p.m. That's dinner time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tim, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Keep producing those videos. We're going to continue to watch them. I put the link in the
Amazing.
chat for people to subscribe to you if they haven't already. Any last parting words? Anything you're working on? Anything you want to promote?
Not really. I just again, a big thank you to everyone who watches, and it's great to be at user groups. Please support people like Aaron and Yumel, because they're the ones who are doing the hard work, bringing everyone together. I get to turn up and take a bit of praise for making videos, but you create the platform that we can talk on. So yeah, thank you for that.
All right, Tim, good seeing you. I'll see you sometime. Hopefully, a bit at the next conference. You're going to go next year in San Diego.
I definitely
Okay,
will
great.
go to the next conference. So I'll see you there.
Yeah, me too. All right, Tim. Thanks again.
Good.
Thanks everybody. I'll draw off the swag, and then I'll contact you if you won. Otherwise, everyone have a great rest of your day. Tim, again, thanks.
No
See
worries.
you guys.
Absolute pleasure.
See you guys later.
Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.